فصل في الحث على طلب العلم والعمل والتعليم واطلب علوم الدين وارقى إلى اليقين فالعلم قوت القلب فيه رضاء الرب.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. بعد، نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه مع اللطف والعافية برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك العلم اللدني والمشرب الصافي الهني يا وهاب يا غني. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. First of all, to start, right now we're covering the second integral of prayer. And as we mentioned in the previous lesson, prayer is made up of 13 integrals, which are things that one must do for their prayer to be correct. The first one that we mentioned in the previous lesson was the intention. And the intention must come with every prayer to distinguish an act of worship from a habitual act that a person does. So now in this lesson we'll be covering the second integral of prayer, which is what they call in the Arabic language Takbir al-Ihram. Takbir is the word that they use in the fiqh terminology referring to the utterance of the words Allahu Akbar, which is a phrase used to magnify Allah and to glorify Allah, and it's also used to enter into the state of prayer. So here the author said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, الثاني أن يقول الله أكبر في القيام. So meaning that the second integral is that one says Allahu Akbar while standing. So the reason it's called Takbir al-Ihram, Takbir is referring to the utterance of the word of the phrase Allahu Akbar. And the reason it's called al-Ihram, it's from the word haram. Because when one enters the state of prayer, what was halal beforehand becomes haram in the prayer. For example, eating, drinking, speaking is halal. However, when one enters the state of prayer, these things become haram. And at what moment does that become haram? When the person says Allahu Akbar. Hence, Takbirat al-Ihram is called Takbirat al-Ihram because it makes what was before it, what was halal before it, haram. Also, the fuqaha have said that the wisdom in saying the word Allahu Akbar is that it makes the person who is praying evoke the greatness of the act that he's about to enter. It also evokes the greatness of the one that the person is about to stand before to pray, who is Allah. Every time you're in a state of prayer or you're about to enter prayer, you're about to enter in a state where you are before Allah. And uttering the phrase Allahu Akbar when you're moving from an integral to another integral is to remind you of that, to keep you in a state of magnifying and being aware that Allah is before you, and to also to be aware of His greatness. Another reason it is uttered is to distinguish the fact that you're entering a state of worship called salah. And it's also what distinguishes a person from doing a normal act and being in a state of prayer. So it's the intention followed by saying Allahu Akbar. And that's how one enters the state of prayer. Then the author goes on and says, ولا يضر تخلل يسير وصف لله تعالى أو سكوت. Meaning, when a person utters the takbir, that the takbir is not impaired by an addition of a short attribute of Allah, the Most High, or a short silence between the words of takbir. So the words of takbir are Allahu Akbar, two words. They're two words that uttered back to back. However, if one or two simple words are inserted between these two words, Allah and Akbar, it is fine, as long as these two words are an attribute of Allah. So if one, for example, were to say Allahu al-Jalil Akbar, al-Jalil meaning the majestic, which is one of the attributes of Allah, then it's fine. Or if one says Allahu Azza wa Jal Akbar, which meaning Allah, the most majestic, the most powerful, Akbar, then that is fine. Also, if one was to say Allahul Akbar, adding the alif lam of ta'rif, that is also fine. The prayer is still valid. However, it is not the best. The best is to utter Allahu Akbar, just those two words. The main reason is because this is how we know that the Prophet ﷺ prayed. This is what he said in all of his prayers. So it is the best to say just those two words without interfering something else in it. Also, if someone happened to interject more than two words, like for example, if someone says Allahu la ilaha illa huwa Akbar, that also invalidates the takbir, because uttering more than three words at this point is considered speech. So it would be as if someone has uttered more words than necessary between the two words of Takbirat al-Ihram. So it's almost kind of invalidates the whole meaning of saying Allahu Akbar. Also, the author says aw sukut, or a short silence, or a momentary silence. And the common example that is given is that when one says Allahu Akbar, if they pause for a second between those two words, or for a moment, such as to catch one's breath, then that is fine. As long as that pause is not long enough that it makes it seem as if those two words are not connected. So if, for example, if someone says Allah, then looks around, thinks about something for a minute, then says Akbar, then that is invalid. He has to say them back to back. And also the pause that he makes between these two words should be for a reason, such as catching one's breath, not just to fool around. Because if someone does that, that will also invalidate Takbirat al-Ihram. Then the author goes on and says, وَيُتَرْجِمُ الْعَاجِزُ بِأَيِّ لُغَةٍ شَاءَ, meaning, and he who is incapable of saying the takbir, meaning Allah Akbar, in Arabic, may translate it to any language he wishes. So, assuming that a person is new to Islam and they're not familiar with the Arabic language, and they need to learn Arabic so they can pray, if they are unable to pronounce the words of Allahu Akbar in Arabic, that means they are someone who is incapable of making the takbir al-ihram. So a person like that is allowed to translate the meaning of those words to enter the state of prayer. However, a person cannot change the translation to any other form of dhikr. For example, in the English language, a person will translate Allahu Akbar to Allah is the greatest, and then enters the state of prayer. That is if he is not able to learn the Arabic. However, if there's another form of dhikr that he knows, like for example, he is familiar with the words La ilaha illallah, and he knows that La ilaha illallah means there is no God worthy of worship except Allah. He cannot use that to enter prayer. He must translate Takbirat al-Ihram only, which is the words Allahu Akbar, to enter the state of prayer. And again, This is for the person who is incapable of saying it before prayer. The next, the author rahimahullah says, وَيَجِبُ تَعَلُّمُهُ وَلَوْ بِالسَّفَرِ وَيُؤَخِّرُ الصَّلَاةِ لِلتَّعَلُّمِ. Meaning, since uttering Takbirat al-Ihram, the words Allahu Akbar, is an integral part of prayer, it is obligatory that a person must learn these phrases. So وَيَجِبُ تَعَلُّمُهُ وَلَوْ بِالسَّفَرِ وَيُؤَخِّرُ الصَّلَاةِ لِلتَّعَلُّمِ translates to, and it is obligatory to learn the utterance of Takbir even if one has to travel, and one delays his prayer to learn it if necessary. So the example that we gave previously, if someone, for example, becomes Muslim and they only speak the English language, they have to learn how to utter the phrase of Takbirat al-Ihram, even if they have to travel. Obviously, that normally doesn't happen at the same moment, but assuming that a person has the means to travel, and the fuqaha say, even if he has the same provisions to travel to Hajj, he needs to take those provisions to go wherever it takes him to be able to utter the phrase Allahu Akbar. That is how important this is. So if someone doesn't have those provisions, then he's excused, but he should use any means he has around him to learn how to utter that phrase, even if he has to travel to learn how to say it. Also, as far as knowing when a person should learn when to say Allahu Akbar, there's a disagreement between Imam Ibn Hajar and Imam Al-Ramli, who provide the two main opinions of the Shafi'i madhab. So the main opinion is when one becomes Muslim, he needs to learn it immediately so he can start his prayer. However, their disagreement comes, when should a child learn how to say these phrases? So Imam Ibn Hajar says that a child should learn how to say Allahu Akbar when they reach the age of discernment, or tamyiz in Arabic, which they say is about 7 or 8 years old. However, Imam Al-Ramli says, no, a child should learn how to utter the phrase Allahu Akbar by the time they're baligh, or they're the age of puberty, because that's when Salah becomes incumbent upon them. They have to pray, it's obligatory. And then Allah says, وَيَؤَخَّرُ الصَّلَاةُ لِلتَّعَلُّمِ, meaning, if someone, assuming someone just took their shahada and they became Muslim, and it's time to pray, the time for Dhuhr has entered. Obviously, the best is to pray the prayer at the beginning of its time. However, this person is allowed to delay his prayer until he learns how to utter this phrase, Takbirat al-Ihram. He is allowed to delay his prayer up until he has enough time to catch the whole prayer, which is right before Asr. So he has all this time available for him to learn how to utter this phrase properly, so he can enter the prayer properly. Next, the author says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ إِسْمَاعُ نَفْسِهِ التَّكْبِيرِ وَكَذَا الْقِرَاءَةِ وَسَائِرِ الْأَرْكَانِ. Meaning, it is a condition for one to hear his opening takbir. Meaning he must hear himself when he utters the words Allahu Akbar. Likewise with the recitation of the Quran, which is obligatory, such as Fatiha. When someone recites Surah Al-Fatiha, it's also obligatory for one to be able to hear himself. And all other integrals, such as At-Tashahhud. And also when someone recites the Afkar, the Sunan, it is a condition that he must hear it himself. For example, when in Ruku' one says Subhan Rabbil Azim wa bihamdi, or in Sujood when someone says Subhan Rabbil A'la wa bihamdi, one should be able to hear himself uttering those phrases. So just to reiterate, the second integral of prayer is uttering the Takbir al-Ihram, which is uttering the words Allahu Akbar in prayer. And it has to be said correctly. So in summation, there are 20 conditions that need to be fulfilled to utter the words Allahu Akbar properly so that the prayer is correct. So we'll just go through the 20 conditions quickly, and they're very simple. A lot of them are within each other, or we discussed already. So the first one is that the person hears himself saying Allahu Akbar. And this is assuming that there's no outside noise causing interference. And the example they give is if someone is about to enter prayer and there's noise outside that's making it difficult for him to hear himself, he just needs to say it loud enough, just assuming if there was no noise, he would hear himself. He doesn't have to yell or scream. Just moderately raise your voice such that you can hear yourself. The second condition, that it happens that you say Takbir al-Ihram and تكون حالة القيام في الفرض, that it happens while the person is standing for the fardh prayer, the obligatory prayer. Third, that it is in the Arabic language. Fourth, that it's ordered. Allahu Akbar, not Akbar Allah. It must be said in the correct order. Allahu Akbar. Fifth, that lafd al-jalala, the word Allah, is used. So a person cannot say Ar-Rahim Akbar or Al-Jalal Akbar. He must say Allahu Akbar. Sixth, An-Nutq bil-Lafz Akbar, that a person says the word Akbar. So those two words are important because it's called Takbirat al-Ihram. So the word Akbar must be present as well. Also, not extending the Hamza of the word Allah. So someone should not say Allahu Akbar, because then it sounds like it's a form of a question. Second, not extending the letter Ba in the word Akbar, because if you extend the letter Ba, if someone says Akbar, that is invalid, because that word actually means a drum. It's a type of drum that the Arabs used. It's called Akbar. So not extending the Ba. Ninth, not doing tajdeed on the Ba, which is emphasizing the sound of the Ba. So if someone says Allahu Akbar, that's also invalid. Then the 10th condition is al-muwala, means the two words have to be uttered back to back. Allahu Akbar. And you're also allowed a small pause if necessary. Then عدم مد ألف الجلالة. So when someone says Allah, that sound of alif, Allah, should not be extended too long. Also, a person should not add the letter waw, which in Arabic means and, between the two words. So if someone says Allahu Akbar, that is invalid. Also, it's invalid to add the letter waw before lafz al-jalal. So if someone says Wallahu Akbar, also invalid. The 14th condition is to not exchange any of its letters. All of its letters must be pronounced correctly. 15th, that when someone says lafz al-jalala, it must be said during the time of prayer. So if someone says Allahu Akbar before the time of prayer and then waits for the prayer time and then enters, that is invalid. The utterance of the phrase puts you in a state of prayer, which must be done during the time of prayer. 16th, that it's tied to the intention. When the person makes the intention, he also says Allahu Akbar. 17th, that the person who is being led in prayer, the ma'moom, must say it after the imam. So after the imam says Allahu Akbar, then you say Allahu Akbar. you should not say it at the same time or before him. 18th, that when you say it while facing the Qibla. And in the Shafi'i madhab, the most important thing when facing the Qibla is that for one's chest faces the Qibla. So if one was to face to his right or left while his chest is facing the Qibla and says Allahu Akbar, his prayer is still correct. But it's better to have one's face facing the Qibla. The 19th is that when someone says Takbirat al-Ihram for prayer, is that he should intend to enter prayer. He should not be saying it for a different reason. Lastly, the word Akbar. The first letter is what Arabs call Hamza al-Qata', which means the Hamza must be pronounced clearly. Allahu Akbar. And the last thing we'll mention is something we touched upon in the last lesson. So some of the fuqaha have said that when someone says Takbirat al-Ihram and they're making the intention, that they should within their mind have presence of the whole prayer and all of its integrals. But some of the fuqaha said that that is too difficult. So the most important thing is that while uttering the Takbirat al-Ihram, that the intention is in there somewhere, the beginning, middle, end of saying the words Allahu Akbar. And because not everyone is able to have presence of mind of all the actions of prayer while uttering those two words. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.